Describe the shared responsibility model. Azure shared responsibility model. You may have heard of the shared responsibility model, but you may not understand what it means or how it impacts cloud computing. Start with the traditional cooperating data center. The company is responsible for maintaining the physical space, ensuring security, and maintaining or replace the servers if anything happens. The IT department is responsible for maintaining all the infrastructure and software needed to keep data center up and running. They are also likely to be responsible for keeping all systems patched and on the correct version. So with the shared responsibility model, these responsibilities get shared between the cloud provider and the consumer. Physical security, power, cooling, and networking connectivity are the responsible of the cloud provider. On the other hand, the consumer isn't co-located with the data center, so it wouldn't make sense for the consumer to have any of those responsibilities. At the same time, the consumer is responsible for the data and the information stored in the cloud. You wouldn't want the cloud provider to be able to read your information. So the consumer is also responsible for access security, meaning you only give access to those who use it. Then, for some things, the responsibility depends on the situation. If you are using Cloud SQL database, the cloud provider would be responsible for maintaining the actual database. However, you are still responsible for the data that gets ingested into database. If you deployed a virtual machine and installed an SQL database on it, you would be responsible for database patches and updates, as well as maintaining the data and information stored in that database. With an on-premise data center, you are responsible for everything. With cloud computing, those responsibilities shift. The shared responsibility model is heavily tied into the cloud service types, covered later in this course: infrastructure as a service, IaaS, platform as service, PaaS, and software as service, SaaS. IaaS, or infrastructure as a service, places the most responsibility on the consumers, with the cloud provider being responsible for the basics of physical security, power, and connectivity. On the other hand of the spectrum, SaaS places most of the responsibility with the cloud provider. PaaS, being middle ground between IaaS and SaaS, rests somewhere in the middle and eventually and evenly distributes the responsibilities between cloud provider and the consumer. The following diagram highlights how the shared responsibility model informs who is responsible for what, depending on the cloud service type. Okay? So here you can see that the responsibility, here we have the Microsoft, we have the customer, we have, this means shared. All right? Now the responsibility always retained by the customer. Here you can see that the responsibility, information and data, devices and mobile PC, accounts and identity. So for information data here, you can see for the SaaS, it is for the customer. For PaaS, it is the customer. Everything here, you can see that everything here is responsible on the customer. It is the customer's responsibility. But on the other hand, here, if you can see that responsibility varies by type. So for example, identity and directory infrastructure, you can see for the SaaS, it is shared. For the PaaS, it is shared. IaaS and on-premise, no, it is on the customer. For the applications, you can see the SaaS is completely on Microsoft. Here you can see that it is completely on Microsoft. Here the PaaS is shared and so on. Okay, so the network controls here, it is on Microsoft itself, because this is the SaaS after all. Operating system, the SaaS is for Microsoft and PaaS is for Microsoft. Otherwise, the IaaS and on-premise is the customer's responsibility. Here you can see that the responsibility transfers to cloud provider. So for example, we have physical hosts, we have physical network, we have physical data center. So you can see that the SaaS, the PaaS, the IaaS are the Microsoft responsibilities. Okay, so you can see that blue here, which means that it is Microsoft responsibility. On-premise, of course, if you can see that everything on-premise is the customer responsibility. After all, it is their own hardware, their own data center, their own network. Okay? You will always be responsible for the information and data stored in the cloud. devices that are allowed to connect to your cloud, cell phones, computers, and so on, the accounts and identities of the people, services, and devices within your organization. The cloud provider is always responsible for the physical data center, physical network, physical hosts, and so on. Your service model will determine responsibility for things like operating systems, network controls, applications, identity and infrastructure, and so on. Thanks for watching.